Index Necrons is out in the wild, and there looks like there's some enormous changes for the faction here. Turns out that Reanimation Protocols is going to be a massive deal in the new index, the Crypteks Reanimator looking particularly scary, but just a whole bunch of improvements and really interesting special rules scattered throughout. Let's talk through some of the biggest highlights. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Necrons, and it looks like the Tomb Worlds are rising up in force. Some really interesting and cool rules here, I think. Necrons have definitely had some ups and downs over the course of 9th edition, generally getting very strong with their big objective rules, but perhaps became a little bit more mid-tier or struggling a bit towards the end of the edition. Hopefully 10th edition will bring them back in force. In this review I thought we'd talk through the majority of the more interesting rules in the index, things that really seem to have changed, either weapon profiles, and in particular the very powerful datasheet abilities that are really going to change the way that a unit functions, bar its raw stats. I've gone through the entire index and picked out some of the most interesting things from the various different characters and units, though at this point I thought I'd hold off and make you a full complete review of it. We'll save that until we have points values, and I'll hope to make the full index review sometime next week. Even without points though, we can get a really good idea as to how some of the units can function, and some of these datasheet abilities look absolutely nuts. Let's get into it though and talk about everyone's favourite undead robot skeletons. First up, one of the biggest changes to Index Necrons is the Reanimation Protocols rule. We'd already seen this previewed on Warhammer Community, basically regenerating D3 wounds, and that would allow you to set up slain models if you had a squad that had taken casualties and you'd already healed up any other miniatures in your units. Nice and simple and effective. I feel like it's a little bit less fiddly than the last version, and particularly doesn't weirdly exclude things like 3 wound or 4 wound models from basically having much good chance of reanimating. I think I do quite like the feel of it better as well. It actually feels like models coming back rather than another weird type of save, though it does definitely have a bit of counterplay. Your opponent can potentially focus down one unit at a time, so hopefully you wouldn't be able to roll them. But it looks like with the sheer amount of supporting rules for reanimation protocols, that might be harder than it would look per the rule alone. There really is a pretty massive list of things that can either heal units, make them tougher, or augment reanimation protocols in some ways. Here are some of the most notable. Warriors, we already knew, get a big D6 reanimation protocols, so loads of models restored there, going all the way up to a D3+3 on objectives, 5 of the new warriors restored. That's quite big on its own, and a massive swing if the opponent damages a unit but doesn't kill it, they're just going to get straight back up. I think one of the craziest buffs to reanimation protocols is probably the Crypteks Reanimator, really actually genuinely useful now. It's got a massive 12-inch aura, where every time a Necron unit reanimates within that aura, they get an extra D3 wounds restored, whether they're infantry or vehicles. The Reanimator still isn't the hardest to gun down in the world, but it has got a massive durability boost with Feel No Pain 4+, basically means it's pretty much double as tough as it was before, but I still think it might well be worth just hiding it out of line of sight. You could still have that aura going off, and affects really quite a lot of your Necron army, even if it is just chained to standing behind a ruin or a big wall or something. Otherwise, Technomancers don't really key off reanimation protocols, but give units a Feel No Pain, and can also heal damaged big units as well, so that will kind of stack with multiple sources of wounds being regenerated. Resurrection Orbs are no longer once per game, they allow you to reanimate Necrons at the end of your opponent's command phase as well as the end of yours, effectively doubling the amount of models that you can expect back for your unit. If that's applied to a Necron warrior squad, you'll definitely be regenerating a whole ton of them. Ghost Arcs get an interesting one where they get to once per phase repair a unit or reactivate reanimation protocols on Necron warriors when they've just lost damage to an attack. That means that, say, your opponent just plinks off a couple of Necron warriors, the Ghost Orc just casually regenerates maybe D3+3 more. Utterly brutal there. The Catacomb Command Barge can pick out a unit to hand out reanimation within 12 inches of it. That's kind of nice to get the Resurrection Orb type ability, but not locked to individual squads. And just in case the reanimation protocol is rolling a bit low for you, you might be able to use that Convergence of Dominion if you wanted, re-rolling the number of models reanimated, which would give you a bit more reliability. Finally, there's even a stratagem to allow you to trigger reanimation protocols out of phase, and it goes off at D3+1 wounds rather than D3 if you happen to have a character in the unit. Overall, it does look like there's a pretty spectacular amount of ways to reanimate here, including ones that aren't just locked to your own command phase as well. I have a feeling that this could just be absolutely nightmarish to play against for a big stacked up warrior blob or something. If you don't fully wipe out the units, then there's a very good chance that they're just going to reanimate and you're going to be facing the full unit again next turn, particularly with characters with resurrection orbs plus perhaps a reanimator. Necrons look like they're going to be reanimating harder than ever, I think. For the major weapon classes, we've got Gauss and Tesla. Gauss now gives lethal hits, which I think is quite nice for just helping you do a bit more chip damage against vehicles. I think you'll definitely want some dedicated anti-tank with things like Death Rays or those very scary Gauss Destructors, but still this will allow a lot of your foot troops just to plink off a few wounds to help out the cause against knights and things. The warrior weapons did get toned down a little bit, the flares are AP 0 and the reapers are AP 1. The vehicle mounted heavy Gauss cannon is strength 8, AP 2 and damage 2, and the locust version is strength 5 at this profile. Definitely a little bit of a nerf on stats, but still the lethal hits will help out really quite a lot here I think. Tesla weapons are basically sustained hits 2 for the vast majority of their guns. The carbine gives you 2 shots with the assault keyword at strength 5 at AP 0, damage 1 now. Lost a little bit of range at 18 inches there. Standard Tesla cannons give you 6 shots at AP 0, damage 1, again 2 extra shots for every exploding 6. And the Twin Tesla Destructor on the Annihilation Barge gives you a whole load of damage 2 attacks now. Only 6 shots, but re-rolling the wound roll with twin links. Looks like a fairly general purpose weapon, definitely going to stack some saves with the amount of fire coming out of that thing. Tesla still will be very anti-infantry though, given that it's got 0 AP. For a few leaders to the army, here we have the Crypteks. These can attach to Immortals, Lichguard or Warriors, and can join them even if a Noble or Royal Warden has joined them. Most of these still seem very good. The Technomancer gives a 5+ feel no pain to the lead unit, pretty massive on a big warrior block there I think, and plus allows you to heal D3 wounds on one individual model too. The feel no pain is just great, I think that's pretty amazing on any of those 3 unit classes, perhaps the Lichguard more than most maybe. Feel no pain just doesn't go quite as far on things like warriors if they get hit by damage 2 weapons. The Psychomancer perhaps unsurprisingly does battle shock things, -1 leadership in a 9-inch aura and hands out a battle shock test in the shooting phase. It's decent enough, but you're still going to have basically a coin flip chance of your opponent passing it anyway, still not enormously reliable in my opinion. The Chronomancer I think looks still very interesting, no longer grants a 5+ invul save to his unit unfortunately, but he does give them -1 to hit. That's still going to be very powerful and a good durability boost. The really interesting thing that he does though is that he allows his units to move, shoot, move at 5 inches, means that you can basically get a lot more movement towards your chosen objective, or potentially ping your squad out of cover, shoot them, and then hide back in cover, or get out of line of sight. I guess that could be handy enough on some mortals pinging some Gauss shots. The Plasmancer actually finally has a leadership buff now. He makes ranged attacks, both 5+ critical hits. That's very nice for either Gauss or Tesla with the lethals or sustained hits. Both of those are really meaningful damage boosts to the unit, so if you've got a shooty warrior squad or shooty immortals, seems like he could be tempting. He still gets a bit of his own shooting as well, and he's got an interesting anti-horde attack where you roll a dice per every model in the enemy unit. Every 6 gives you a mortal wound on the target, so quite good against mass squads, but less so against elites. Illuminor Scarabs I think looks really interesting as well. He works as a lone operative, provided there's some Necrons nearby, and he's got really quite a cool aura where battle line units get their AP increased by -1 with all their attacks, and also gives them basically a better save as well, as enemy attacks get their AP worsened by 1 when they attack them. Again, if you're building a really durable warrior squad, you could maybe have a Technomancer in the unit and Scarabs nearby. Effectively they're at +1 save and the 5+ feel no pain, never mind that scary reanimation. For the stratagems wise, the Necron launch detachment has 6. I think one of the most fun is a reactive reanimation, regenerating D3 wounds or D3+1 if there's a character attached to the unit, and it's quite powerful that you get to do this in your opponent's shooting or fight phase, as it means that you get a little bit of your reanimation early if you really need it for your squad to survive. Could be kind of interesting for positioning or objective shenanigans as well. It looks like this one can be buffed by things like the Warriors, extra reanimation, and also the Canoptek Reanimators, extra reanimated models as well, meaning that this could be a serious amount of wounds restored to a unit. Even on non-warriors it seems good. If you had some Lichguard led by a character and a reanimator nearby, that would be on average 5 wounds restored for 1 CP. There's a 1 command point 1 to give your units assault weapons, kind of nice for slightly slower warriors, particularly with things like Gauss Reapers losing it. Very nice if it makes the difference between shooting or not, and if you've got a character in the unit you can re-roll the advanced rolls too. There's a 1 command point 1 to return fire if your squad lost a model. Very nice if you get a meaningful amount of shooting out of it. Could be scary on something like some Necron heavy destroyers. Again, having a character in the unit augments the stratagem again, granting ignore cover. For 1 command point, there's a nice character resurrection one. Resurrect an infantry character, no questions asked for 1 command point. When it dies the first time, it just surges back to life with half its wounds remaining. Pretty nice to basically have guaranteed insurance and it comes back at the end of the phase. It means that if your opponent kills a character in the fight phase, you'll basically guaranteed get another turn of acting out of them, as they'll basically have no opportunity to kill them until your turn. Really means that a big squad led by a character is just fantastically durable, Never mind all the reanimation the normal squad can do, the character's almost guaranteed to live unless your opponent can coordinate shooting then assault. You can only use it one time per character for obvious reasons. For 1 command point, there's a +1 strength in melee one, and if the character's nearby you get the extra AP -1 as well. Looks like that could be fun for things like Lich Guard maybe. I feel like it's pretty meaningful if you can get both buffs off, perhaps a little bit lackluster if it's only the +1 strength. Finally, for 1 command point, there's a shooting unit getting to reroll 4 wound rolls against the closest targets. A really massive damage buff to be able to access for 1 command point there, basically good on any Necron shooting unit, the bigger the better. And again, better if you've got a character in the squad, as if you get to do that, you get to reroll the shooting wound rolls at full range, not just half. Again, that seems like a very easy one to just translate command points into damage. Overall, I feel like Necrons are spoilt for choice with these. That reactive reanimation seems very handy, particularly with the buffs it can get. Return Fire and the Conquering Tyrant one to reroll wound rolls, both of those seem like great extra damage and more dead enemy models. And resurrecting an infantry character just seems incredibly annoying for the opponent, basically 100% guaranteeing that they can't kill them in this phase. Very powerful stratagems, and I think that they'll be good for the Necron army. I quite enjoyed the new rules for the Hexmark Destroyer. This one can do lots of out of phase shooting, and it strikes with 6 shots, strength 6, AP -2 and damage 1. Pretty excellent for dealing with hordes, and it does have precision for sniping some characters as well. I think it looks only kind of okay really for its direct damage, but what it can do is fire Overwatch for 0 CP once per turn, and when it does it hits on a 2+, means that you basically get an extra free shooting attack if your opponent moves within 18 inches of it, but you can only do it by 1 Hexmark per turn, so you can't stay stack 3 of them and do all of it all for free. Looks like you could maybe have one for 0 CP and one next to it that you spend the usual 1 command point on though. 12 shots of that profile could be pretty intimidating for a lot of infantry units. As well as that though, it's also got a fun shoot to return fire type rule with its multi-threat eliminator. If one of your nearby Necron units gets shot, it just gets to casually shoot as if it were the shooting phase, and it doesn't even need to target the unit that attacks that Necron unit in the first place. Basically a massive discouragement to enemies trying to clear out Necron units nearby to you if they are in range with one of their other units. Looks like this guy could be a very annoying threat to support the advance. Here we've got a few leaders, and also I thought we'd mention the Necron Command Protocols rule, +1 to hit for a Necron unit that has a leader in it, basically making any of the characters a lot more valuable in this detachment compared with other detachments that the Necrons might get. As with all the stratagems that we've seen that get boosted with leaders as well, basically this is the detachment that's going to revolve around things like Crypteks and Nobles in your squads. As mentioned, Resurrection Orbs are rather nice. Resurrection Protocols both in your command phase and in your opponent's. I feel like they'll be quite popular on the characters that can take them. Most of them can here, the Overlord Lord and the Locust Lord. For their actual buffs, the Overlord gives you basically the Space Marine Captain rule, a 0 CP stratagem for his unit per battle round, and you can't stack multiple copies of that in your army. Pretty awesome given the Necron stratagems. I feel like the reactive reanimation one could be tempting for that. He also has -1 damage baked into his profile as well, so he's a bit harder to kill if his squad gets killed. The Royal Warden grants his units the heavy and the assault keyword on their weapons. The heavy keyword may be a little bit redundant in this particular detachment, given that he gives them +1 to hit already. Still though, I guess it could be useful against modifiers. I think assault is probably a bit more useful, particularly for Gauss Reapers maybe wanting to get within 12-inch range. It can also cancel battle shot once per battle as well, which I think is kind of useful to have scattered in your army. The Necron Lord gives you a +1-inch move, and it allows you to use stratagems even if you're battle shocked. Definitely not nothing, but maybe not quite as exciting. I feel like perhaps cheaply accessing a Resurrection Orb might be one of the most interesting things that he does. For the Destroyers, the Scorpet Lord grants lethal hits to his Scorpet Destroyer squad, and he does some mortal wound impact hits as well as his own big melee. The Locust Lord grants you 5+ to hit critical hits. He joins the Locust Destroyers or the Locust Heavies. That's very nice for the Gauss weapons to auto wound with the lethals, and again he can bear the Resurrection Orb as well, so tanks up their durability. The Catacomb Command Barge now is a bit more of a direct vehicle. You can shoot it now and it can't be screened like a character. This one gives you an aura of +1 objective control when you're within 6 inches. Really quite nice for objective control 3 warriors or immortals there. And he can use the Resurrection Orb basically targeted to one of your units in the command phase. Quite nice that you can access that buff even on things that can't be joined with squads with a Resurrection Orb. Could be used to help out a vehicle or something like some wraiths. The barge isn't the hardest to kill in the world, but is a bit harder than some of the other Necron vehicles. It does have its 4+ invul save with a new quantum shielding, and it also has a -1 to wound for heavy weapons that will be wounding it on a 4+ or better, so it is a little bit harder to kill, although you can just directly shoot it with heavy weapons, which isn't ideal. Out of these, I feel like Overlords are going to be popular with the free Stratagems, plus the Resurrection Orb as well. For a few more interesting elites, the Death Marks retain their sort of intercept deep strike ability, appearing within 18 inches of an enemy unit that came on from reserves, and then lighting them up with Strength 5 and Damage 2 weaponry. Quite a big deal, given that I feel like reserves are probably going to be a little bit more common in 10th edition. Things like Rapid Ingress are quite nice, and a fair few things have moves to teleport off the board and then be set back up in the opponent's reinforcement phase. A big squad of them could potentially solo an enemy infantry unit that really didn't want to be shot first. Lich Guards still just generally look like a big tough unit that's going to have decent enough damage and defense, probably going to be one of the better units to lead with characters and things, perhaps competing against the warriors with their big reanimation. Their special rule is getting a -1 to wound if the character is leading the squad, really not too bad on top of their toughness 5. This one isn't capped by being a weapon that would wound them on a 4+ or anything, so that would even apply to small arms. Things like bolters will be wounding them on 6s here. Flayed ones I also think will probably have more of an interesting battlefield role as well. They've gained the Infiltrators keyword, so we'll be setting up in the midboard. Really quite nice to have some midfield presence on objectives and things, and even maybe threaten charges on enemy infantry and stuff. Their claws do seem really quite nice generalist profiles, 4 attacks at strength 4, AP -1 and damage 1, and also with the Twin Links keyword as well, so you're going to be fairly effective against punching up against tougher stuff too. Like last time, they also have sustained hits, and they interestingly get to have all their hits counted as critical hits if the enemy is below half strength. Means that it looks like they're extra good at finishing off depleted squads of enemy infantry. I suspect that as a result of these changes, they're probably going to cost a few more points than currently. Might not be the worst idea in the world though. To some extent, just based on the plastic kit, it probably makes sense to make them a bit more elite, given how expensive they are. Looks like you can't field squad sizes of 20 anymore, unfortunately. There's only 5 to 10 of them. I have a feeling that that will be optimal anyway, really, given that they're starting in the midfield. For Necron character enhancements, the Veil of Darkness is back. That unfortunately can't be used in engagement range anymore though, which is kind of sad as it was quite a popular use of it. It means that it can't really be used to rescue your shooting units from melee without counting as falling back, but it can still be used for some teleport shenanigans. The way it's triggered is the same as quite a lot of other redeployment type rules in 40k. You have to declare it at the end of your opponent's turn, and then the unit drops back down in your reinforcement phase, anywhere 9 inches away from your models. A little bit more restrictive, but I feel like that's still going to be absolutely massive for a big scary unit. Otherwise, the Hypermaterial Ablator looks excellent. It gives your unit the benefit of cover if you're greater than 12 inches away, and also just innately gives you stealth as well. Seems like the exact sort of thing that you want on any sort of big durable Necron squad trying to survive to reanimate. The benefit of cover looks like it would stack really well with a nearby Illuminor Serraz as well. Necron warriors could be saving on a 3+, and then the enemy's AP could be worsened by 1 as well. Those Necron warriors aren't going anywhere anytime soon. The Sovereign Coronal is an interesting one that means that Necron units within 6 inches count as being led by a character, means that you get the +1 to hit from the command protocols, which is kind of big for things that can't normally be led. So I guess that will be +1 to hit for certain vehicles and things, which is pretty massive, and can also access the boosted version of the Stratagems. Finally, the last one is the Sempiternal Weave. The bearer gets a 4+ feel no pain type ability. A bit more of a personal durability buff, that one. I guess could be okay for something big and chunky like a Scorpek Lord maybe. At least from first readings, it doesn't look like there's anything wrong with taking it on a Catacomb command barge either. That seems like the best place for that, basically flat doubling its durability. I must admit I feel like these enhancements are absolutely standout. All of them seem truly amazing unless they cost obscene amount of points. A really nice redeploy, an excellent durability boost on an army that revolves around durability, an excellent damage boost of +1 to hit for a bunch of units that wouldn't normally be able to get it, and a 4+ feel no pain seems almost auto-included for the command barge, basically meaning it's twice as hard to kill. I have a feeling that we'll see multiple of these in play in most Necron lists. Next up we've got Destroyer units. The Scorpeks gain Toughness 6, all their weapons are now Strength 7, AP 2 and Damage 2 now, so losing a little bit of AP there, and also a little bit of punchy damage on the big reap blades that the Squad Sergeant kind of had. They also changed to ignore hit roll modifiers, but no more built-in rerolls for them, and the Plasma Sights now are basically counters rather than weird independent units. They just give you devastating wounds for a turn, which seems very worth it. Still seem very threatening overall. I guess maybe just a little bit harder to support given that they don't have many characters that can join them. They'd have to rely on the Scorpek Lord for this detachment that really does seem to revolve around characters joining units. Otherwise, the Ophidians had all their attacks consolidated into a 5 attack profile. They strike at strength 4, AP -2 and damage 2. A little bit on the low strength side, I think. They did gain toughness 5 though, and this kind of works similar to how they were before. They can tunnel on and off the board just within their core datasheet now. The Locust Destroyers have strength 5 Gauss cannons at AP 2 and damage 2 with the lethal hits. They get to reroll hit rolls of 1 against the nearest target, which is quite nice, and that seems like that would stack very nicely with the stratagem to reroll wound rolls as well. Means that you will be handing out really quite a lot of AP 2 damage 2 wounds on a target there. Looks like they could be kind of interesting for the Locust Lord with his boosted critical hits, though it looks like you can't soup in a Heavy Destroyer now, they're locked to their own unit. The Heavy Destroyer I think has had his Enmity Exterminator improved quite a lot. This now gets 6 attacks base at strength 6, AP-1 and damage 1, but also gained rapid fire 6 as well, so it's basically double as threatening within half range. Quite a lot better now. I felt like it was a little bit lackluster against hordes before. The Gauss Destructor is still a pretty monumental tank shot as well that your opponent can't really ignore. Just a single shot at heavy 1, strength 14, AP-4 and damage 6. Its special rule is to allow you to reroll 1s against its dedicated target, infantry for the Enmity Exterminator, monsters and vehicles for the Destructor. Still looks like some very intimidating fire support, that one. The Silent King I think has maybe been shifted to just be a bit more personal might as opposed to being a massive buff centerpiece, though he is still really quite helpful for boosting shooting I think. For his raw stat line, he'll certainly be a little bit tougher against small arms. He's gained a toughness of 10 and a 2+ save now, as well as his 4+ invul staying, and otherwise his Minears still function the way that they did before, basically being independent on things that can be helpful for soaking overkill from enemy anti-tank guns. His damage profiles have been a little bit consolidated, though still have quite a lot of interesting stuff. His combat is solely with the Scythe of Dusk, 12 attacks at strength 8, AP 3 and damage 2 with lethal hits, general all around quite nice there. And with his ranged attacks he still has those spooky damage 6 Annihilator beams, 2 shots with Zarek's staff at damage 3, and then the Staff of Stars is kind of fun, being an indirect fire weapon now, 12 shots at strength 6, AP-1 and damage 1 with that one. Kind of like the idea of the Staff of Stars raining down destruction from the sky. Zarek's leadership abilities are 3 different aura buff choices that all go off within 6 inches. I think that the best is probably the reroll 1s to hit and wound at range. Just seems kind of excellent to have in the middle of a Necron gun line, particularly with other character buffs giving them +1 to hit for various units. Could be very scary if it was next to the Sovereign Coronal. Basically Necron units within aura range will be hitting on 2s rerolling 1s. It's pretty nice for amping up his own shooting as well. Having those Annihilator beams re-rolling fatal hit rolls of 1 is pretty cool. Otherwise his combat 1 has been toned down a fair bit, simply re-rolling charges, doesn't get any extra damage in melee, which I think is a bit meh. And otherwise if it happened to be a little bit more effective, you could trade out for ignoring modifiers to your characteristics and hit rolls and things. Against some armies that really go in big for those, that could be powerful. Against a lot of armies it's going to be irrelevant. I feel like the hit roll re-rolls is probably the main one to go for. Overall seems very solid, maybe a little bit more reliant on his own profile to get things done, but the shooting buff is still really big, and he also helps out a little bit with Battle Shock as well, basically allowing you to cancel 1 Battle Shock within 12 inches at the end of your command phase as well, really quite a good insurance against that. I'd say that Scarabs haven't made it out quite so well out of this one. They had a similar sort of rules change to Tyrannid Rippers, going down to objective control 0 and halving enemy objective control if they're within engagement range. I'd say that's honestly really quite a lot worse. Would have been so much better if they just had, say, objective control 1 and lost that other rule. They can't just scurry around the board making off with points all by themselves now. In combat they might nibble away with a few little attacks, 6 attacks at strength 2 base, but they get lethal hits on a 6+. Not really a major threat to anything, but every so often might plink a wound. They only move 9 inches now, not 12, and I've gone down to toughness 2, so are easier to squash. Broadly looks like the aim was to make them a lot more peripheral. They're only really going to be good for nuisance screening units now, and unlike before, not ones that can help out on objectives in any major way. The funnest bit of their rules, though, I think is their self-destruct thing. In combat you get to sacrifice one of them to deal D3 mortal wounds to the enemy, +1 to the roll for vehicles, and if you actually roll a 6+ on that roll, instead of the D3 mortal wounds you get D3+3. Could be a surprise punch if you just needed to try and down an enemy vehicle in a pinch. I did quite like the way that they also seem to have Deadly Demise 1 as well, which is pretty cool. On a 6 they explode, and everything within 6 inches of that swarm takes a mortal wound. Not the most helpful if it happens in the middle of your army, I suppose, though. The Catan have seen some major reworks, as I might have expected really. Phase damage caps seem to have been broadly removed from Warhammer 40k, and probably for the better. They do actually have to rely on their own profile to keep them safe now. As Shards of Star Gods though, they're hardly easy to take down. They've gained toughness 11 and 12 wounds, so really quite tough there. I Things like bolters, which were previously somewhat effective against them, really won't be now. They still retain their 4+ invul save. They get the boosted reanimation protocols again for an extra D3 wounds regenerated rather than just 1. And the Necrodermis is still very powerful as a rule. Any incoming damage gets halved, so say if you hit them with a damage 6 attack, it'd only take 3 wounds off. Pretty massive. Kind of feels like rules that aren't too dissimilar from the Eldar avatar of Cain, maybe. Now they no longer get to choose their own Catan powers, but each of them still does something interesting and different. The Deceiver gets a single decent anti-stat character precision shot, and allows you to redeploy units before the game, though unfortunately now it's before you know who's got first turn, not after, so that will be quite a lot less powerful. Probably looks like the weakest of the bunch in my opinion from a first read. The Nightbringer is still the mightiest. Melee is pretty huge with 6 attacks at strength 14, AP 4 and damage D6. It's got devastating wounds now, but doesn't ignore invuls at base. He does have a sweep mode as well to help him out against infantry. His Gaze of Death is still a really big shot. D3 attacks at strength 12, AP 2 and damage D6 plus 3. Pretty nice against vehicles or exposed characters. And his end of the fight phase rule is called Life Drain. This one means that any enemy units within 6 inches take D3 mortal wounds on a 4+. Not too bad if you can have him wind up in the middle of the enemy army, I guess. The Void Dragon has an interesting rule which allows him to basically drain D3 wounds from a vehicle and heal himself by the same amount. Really quite nice and bad news for tanks. He shoots with a big damage to Voltaic Storm, basically a bit more of an anti-infantry or anti-space marine type weapon there. A whole bunch of strength 8 hits, and his Spear of the Void Dragon is now just flat damage D6 plus 2 against everything, and it's also got the anti-vehicle 2+ rule, meaning that he will absolutely go through things like knights, no questions asked. Probably a similar sort of position to where he was before. Unusually bad news for vehicles, and maybe is a bit more similar to the Nightbringer now, given that the Nightbringer doesn't just sweep straight through invuls. Finally, the new version of the Transcendent Catan basically bounces around the board. If you advance, meaning that you can't charge, it does get to teleport basically anywhere on the board that's greater than 9 inches away, and it still gets to fire off a fairly punchy seismic assault type attack, 6 attacks at strength 8, AP 2 and damage D3. So you could jump him to a really awkward position on the board and then hit one exposed enemy unit fairly hard. You wouldn't be able to charge that same turn, but in the next one you could. Quite a solid melee profile with 8 attacks at strength 9 and damage D6. Overall they generally look pretty interesting. I feel like the Deceivers probably come off the worst out of the bunch of them. All the rest seem like kind of fun models to put on the board though. For Necron vehicles, it looks like Quantum Shielding has been reworked a little bit once more. Previously it was a 5+ invulnerable save, plus basically the transhuman physiology type rule, can't be wounded on better than a 4+. Now though it basically just looks like it's been reworked to a 4+ invulnerable save, which is to say is probably better for some at least. 4+ invulnerables are really quite nice, quite a good use for command point rerolls as well if the opponent does manage to sneak a massive damage hit through them. A fair few of their vehicles are at least fairly low toughness though, say the Annihilation Barge is toughness 8 and the Ghost Ark is toughness 9. For a few of the unit abilities, the Triarch Stalker can target one unit in the opponent army to remove the benefit of cover from, quite nice if you're trying to focus down one key enemy unit I suppose. The Annihilation Barge gets the damage to Tesla profile that we mentioned earlier. Its special rule is Malevolent Arcing. You have a 5+ chance to deal D3 mortal wounds to each unit within 3 inches of the Tesla Destructor's target. Could be kind of big if you get a bit lucky on the rolls, or the enemy unit is right in the centre of a big formation. The Doomsday Arc and the Doomstalker both have received a really quite nice improvement to their gunshot profile. The Doomsday Arc gets D6 plus 1 shots at strength 15, AP 4 and damage 4. It gains heavy and also devastating wounds when it's stationary as well, so it gets significantly more dangerous there. This thing is just massively more dangerous than it was previously with the big random D6 and D6 profiles, and also a lot more reliable. You're still a little bit at the mercy of the D6 shot rule, but you'll still get at least a minimum of 2. Then damage 4 is both flat better and also more reliable than D6. Really an all-round improved weapon there. The Doomstalker on the other hand basically gets a slightly mini version of this profile now. Strength 14 though, AP 3 and damage 3 are all still very nice. It does only hit on a 4+ though, as it did before. I guess you might be able to get better with that Sovereign Coronal if it was nearby. Or you can just keep it stationary and that'll give it a +1 to hit with heavy. It's a nice one to select for Overwatch as well, as it overwatches on a 5+. If you can sneak one of those damage 3 shots into your opponent's unit, then that's probably quite a good use of a CP. There are plenty of other Necron vehicles, including some of the other super heavies, but I feel like the Monolith is one of the most standout ones, getting a big toughness 14, save 2+ and 20 wounds with objective control 8. A pretty nice generalist damage profile with that particle whip, 3d6 shots at strength 8, AP 1 and damage 2 with devastating wounds, There's pretty much nothing that really wants to get hit by that, and perhaps slightly backed up by some death rays, each at strength 12, AP 4 and damage d6 plus 1, with a nice sustained hits d3 if you look out with some 6s. I think the Monolith special rule though really is quite handy and interesting to support the rest of your army, as each turn you can teleport one Necron infantry unit to somewhere within 6 inches of it, and somewhere not within engagement range of the enemy unit. It means that you could rustle up some close range shooting and get it right into the midst of the enemy army, even if you can't charge. Could be nice just to shunt some Necron units onto objectives as well, or get them into a more useful place from elsewhere on the board where they might be a bit pinned down. Looks like quite a nice centerpiece for the forces, and also a lot of common anti-tank weapons all wounded on a 5+, including las cannons. Finally, I thought it was worth a quick look at the Necron Scythes as well. The Night Scythe gets one of those twin Tesla destructors, and I feel like it'll really like the new transport rules as well, zooming out to 20 inches and then dropping off a squad to light up the foe with close range shooting. It can transport any one Necron infantry unit. Its special rule though is that it can re-embark a unit within 6 inches at the end of the fight phase, provided that unit isn't in combat. Sounds like you can just ping out a unit and then re-embark it later in the turn unless there's anything in the core rules that prevents that. Seems like your opponent might have to deal with the Scythe before they can take down the unit within. The Doom Scythe seems very scary as well. The death rays 3 attacks at strength 16, AP 4 and damage d6 plus 1, well capable of taking down the heaviest enemy units around. It also has sustained hits d3 as well, so again really big if you can roll that big 6. It averages 9 wounds into a Rhino without any other buffs, which I think is really quite good for an anti-tank weapon. Again, it also blazes away with one of those Tesla destructors, and then when you shoot someone with the death ray, you get your opponent to make an interesting choice. Either they can choose for their units to be -1 to hit next turn, which could be quite painful on a big nasty enemy tank, or if they don't want that, then the death ray can get a bit of a damage buff against them, getting those critical hits with sustained hits d3 off on a 5+, not a 6. That would be very painful if your opponent chooses the latter, and then you roll maybe 3 5s. Overall, looks really quite good fun, very destructive dedicated anti-tank there. Overall, from first impressions of the index, I feel like the Necrons really haven't done too badly out of this. Really quite a lot of powerful rules, and it really looks like the core mechanics of characters leading units and massive reanimation on key units looks like it's pretty powerful. With some stats character upgrades on Necron warrior squads and things, I feel like they look like an absolute nightmare to remove. Something like a Technomancer with the Hypermaterial Ablator in a Necron warrior squad makes the squad ridiculously more tanky. And then you could pair that with one of the Necron overlords for the reanimation orb, have a ghost art nearby and use that stratagem. Means that you're regenerating a whole load of models in the enemy's turn, never mind when it gets to yours and you get boosted reanimation there. Overall seems pretty solid though, lots of really interesting units that have more dedicated battlefield roles given the special rules that they've gained. Will certainly be interesting to see how all of this fits together when we get some points values, and I'll certainly do a full review of Index Necrons when we do. If you've enjoyed the video and you'd like to see more Necron stuff, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'm sure we'll cycle back to them within the next week or so. And if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.